The modern medicine is given in a controlled dose with a predictable delivery system. Marijuana, if it were a folk remedy, would only be applied to signs and symptoms of insignificant diseases. Yet every time a ballot initiative is written, it is written for the most extreme form of the disease in individuals who have severely debilitating disease. So it has to be either fish or fowl. It can't be neither. It is definitely not a folk remedy, but it is not a modern medicine, and it doesn't belong in the treatment of individuals who could experience severe consequences to their debilitated state by being exposed to it in an unsupervised way outside of the standard of medical practice in this country. Just to review for you the FDA approval steps, there's preclinical animal testing, and then the sponsor of the drug puts together a proposal of human trials that they want to engage in order to take the medicine from a concept to proof of concept. Phase 1, 2, and 3 studies are delineated. They include safety and chronic exposure studies, and they go from small numbers of healthy individuals to study how it gets into the body, how long it stays around, to small numbers of individuals with the disease, to larger sets of individuals with the disease to see how that compound interacts with their disease. After that, the studies are done. There's a pre-new drug admission period where meetings with the FDA and the sponsor occur. The submission is done, and the sponsor asks the FDA for approval, and the FDA reviews the submission and has 60 days to respond. The FDA team, external, objective, scientifically trained, with the experience to understand the studies that they're reviewing, evaluates the safety and effectiveness data, and then the sponsor and the FDA get together and negotiate a label, which allows them to make a specific claim for a specific condition that outlines everything that the physician knows from a robust body of data, everything that the physician needs to know in order to prescribe that medication safely in the individual with that identified condition. The FDA also makes a facility inspection to assure that there is adequate safety in the compounding of the medicine, and it issues its approval or a response letter if the medication cannot be approved. So there are a number of steps of approval that are required. So a serious medication in the modern world requires standardization by composition and dose, quality control in all aspects of manufacture, testing in clinical and preclinical studies, and it has to be administered by a means of appropriate dosing system or in a dosage form. In short, a modern medicine must meet rigorous standards for quality, safety, and efficacy that have been laid down by national regulatory authorities, and the review of that is done by individuals qualified to conduct that review. Often, numerous layers of individuals for each specific component of that review. That's what makes a modern medicine, and that's what protects the public health. The FDA approval process is dependent upon a large body of data. These data ensure that physicians will have access to data that enables them to understand what they are recommending to patients. The extent of the efficacy, the content of each dose, whether the product may interact adversely with other products that you might be taking. How many times have you gone to the pharmacy with a new prescription only to have the pharmacist step out and say, wait a minute, I filled a prescription for X, you're now taking Y, you need to be aware of this drug-drug interaction. Even if you were receiving the medication from two different physicians, if you're using one pharmacy, that review will be done for you. Which patients should not be considered candidates for the product is delineated. What dosing strategy is optimal is delineated. What side effects may be expected and how such a profile compares to other available medications. The FDA approval process is one of accountability, from initial manufacture to prescription to distribution to individual patients. And quality controls are mandated to ensure that the manufacture process is carefully monitored, that it's continually evaluated, that defective products can be recalled. So if you hear of a person having a consequence of being exposed to a certain batch, that batch can be tracked, and every patient who's been given something from that batch can be tracked. Not so with marijuana from a dispensary. Diversion can be investigated, and harms that appear in a population once it's prescribed are tracked and can be assessed, and new information can be sent out through physicians through the medical alert system, the FDA alert system. Medical marijuana is inconsistent in composition. There's no quality control, no proper regulated channels for distribution, and no appropriate physician supervision or oversight. So I know that we've liberalized our prescribing of opioids for moderate to severe pain, and you might get 30 pills if you first present with a new pain syndrome in your knee, for example. But when they run out, certain types of medications require that you be seen by the physician face-to-face before you've been given more. The only thing that limits the amount of marijuana that you have at any given time under these state ballot initiatives is what's written into the initiative. And you can constantly replenish up to that maximum with no physician review or oversight. Issues requiring additional research. We have to avoid making broad conclusions about smoked cannabis in humans from the results of studies involving other preparations and other research settings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about other preparations and research settings, and that doesn't mean that what we have found with certain products is going to be reproducible if Dr. Bob smoked marijuana, which he wouldn't.
Not likely.
We have to acknowledge that from plant to plant there's changing composition, that the dose-response relationships are not well defined and can change just by how long you hold what you inhale, that the method of medication is one that is completely unacceptable to modern medicine, and even saying you're going to use a vaporizer does not eliminate all the problems with smoked or inhaled burnt products. And if you eat it, there are other problems associated with the first pass effect of changing what is absorbed through the GI tract as it goes through the liver. And then there are lots of different subgroups of patients. And so each of these patient groups is studied or tracked in a broad population when a medication has FDA approval. I guess we come down to the question as to whether there is a compelling reason at any point or at any level, compelling reason to exempt cannabis from the modern medication model. Now, if it were parsley from your backyard that you're choosing to chew to freshen your breath, that's one thing. But cannabis is not parsley. It is a controlled substance, Schedule I, that has associated with it problems of abuse and dependence. So should cannabis, for any reason, be exempt from the modern medication model? Well, I think that allowing, this is my opinion, that if we allow cannabis to circumvent the process, it sets a dangerous precedent. We know of a lot of other research-grade cannabinoid analogs that are available that, should we go down this path, might gain their own advocates. So they'll be saying, well, spice is medicine. Let's make spice available for medicine. It's a better cannabinoid than smoked marijuana. And other classes of drugs could reasonably gain advocates. I don't like my cocaine and a coca paste in the emergency room for my bloody nose or for my nose surgery. I want my cocaine in its crack form. And I can inhale the smoke through my nose and can do just the same thing that that doctor is doing in the emergency room. Why do I have to go to the emergency room to shut down my bloody nose when I can smoke crack or snort cocaine? So it's a slippery slope that's set up if we allow cannabis to circumvent a process of FDA approval. So let's look at what might be the basis of the rationale to allow it to be exempt. Well, if it were truly safe, so we have to answer the question, is it benign? If there was quality in composition, and if there was efficacy rather than beliefs of efficacy. So if we could show safety, quality of composition, and efficacy, then it wouldn't really need to be exempt from going through the FDA approval process. So let's look at those three things: safety, quality, and efficacy. First, let's look at why set aside the process. The FDA has provided guidance that looks at taking a botanical raw material and shows how it can be developed into a botanical drug substance and finally botanical drug product. It's issued guidance. There's a lot of interest in herbal medicine, so it's issued guidance on how you take a medicine from a raw material and make a drug product out of it. But even with that, smoked cannabis, the FDA says, would pose unacceptable risk, particularly long-term. Well, you might argue, don't give it to people who are going to live long-term. Let's give it to somebody who's dying, who's going to be dead before they get the lung effects. But if a patient is dying, should all of the arguments be set aside just because they're dying? Do we have any concerns that we may hasten their death by setting aside quality control? I would think that would be the first question that we should ask. So if we believe that cannabis being smoked is unacceptable and dying, severely debilitated patients shouldn't be exposed to the risk of smoked cannabis, then why or when should cannabis be exempted from the modern medication model? Say you accept the notion that severely ill patients ought to have access to it. There is already a process, the fast-track access and compassionate access through treatment INDs that would allow them access under a more safer FDA-approved process. And the FDA and the courts have shown that patients will not benefit from products that have not completed the vast majority of steps leading to an approved medication. So medical necessity, I'm going to die without this, is not sufficient to override an FDA approval process. And for serious, immediate, life-threatening diseases, approval can be provided if there exists no comparable or satisfactory alternative drug or other therapy. But if you read the AMA Council on Scientific Affairs report number 6, they looked at all of the scientific data to that point, comparing cannabis in head-to-head trials or just cannabis data to other trials of medications for all of the indications that were supported for the use of smoked cannabis, and found that there exists an approved FDA medication that is comparable or better in every instance, except one. In HIV wasting, the weight gained from people smoking cannabis was comparable to the weight gain for people taking Marinol or using other ways of gaining weight. But what they found when looking more closely at what that weight gain represented, it was fat cell size and number from empty calorie consumption. Indices that are important to physicians that relate to a person's nutritional status, particularly when you have a severe debilitating disease such as serum albumin and total protein, were not increased in the population that smoked marijuana. And Hyperal and Ensure and other products of that type were superior to marijuana in providing increases in total protein and serum albumin. Thus, there are no studies to date that show that smoked marijuana is superior to an FDA-approved medication that's on the market. And if you want the Council on Scientific Affairs report number 6 and a later report, we can provide that to you if you give one of my staff members your card. Individuals might access, but never by approval of untrained, uneducated electorate or elected officials due to the overriding safety, efficacy, and standardization concerns and the concerns for public health. So while people may access it, neither the FDA nor the courts believe that it should be in an unsupervised fashion, which is the standard of care under all the current existing state ballot initiatives, and that which is proposed here in Illinois. I've given you a list of conditions that are approved in a variety of states for the use of marijuana. Alcohol abuse and alcoholism presents on that list. Autism, ADD, so we're dealing with children. Brain tumor, cancer, epilepsy, insomnia, hepatitis C, and writer's cramp are all approved conditions under a variety of state ballot initiatives. This is not serious medicine. Let's look at the issues of safety versus the myths of safety, because we've heard so much that alcohol is not as safe as marijuana. And I always say that when we're comparing alcohol to marijuana, it's like comparing, cannons to bombs. Which is safer? I don't know. The ILM talks about marijuana being powerful with a variety of effects. These effects are normally identified during preclinical trials. We normally require physician supervision for oversight and collection of things that didn't show up in the trials over time when it's used in the community. And the label delineates for both the patient and the caregiver the risk and the potential benefit. And not all patients receive a benefit from all medicines. There's a lot that we're learning from genetic mapping of individuals about what medications they'll respond to from different classes. The relevant side effects are listed for you: intoxication, anxiety, hallucinations, and so forth. And one important thing to remember about the trials that have been done on smoked cannabis itself is most of the trials have excluded individuals with mental disorders, renal or hepatic impairment, epilepsy, cardiac disease, and substance abuse. But there has never been any provision to exclude that list of patients from access at dispensaries. If they have a qualifying condition and cardiac disease, they can walk into a dispensary and have unfettered access to the state-allowed maximum of marijuana. Adolescent exposure is also problematic. There is clear and compelling evidence of neurocognitive effects of marijuana with early onset of exposure, and a significant amount of adolescent exposure is occurring with no physician supervision. Also, chronic conditions and exposure, such as conditions of the lung, our concerns are not extinguished with the use of vaporizers, because vaporizers differ widely. They have uneven delivery of the marijuana. They cause a rapid rise in blood level with risk of intoxication and dependence associated with that rapid rise. And ammonia and other carcinogens are released even at low temperatures in those vaporizers. Also, person-to-person spread of the vaporizer is associated with person-to-person spread of pathogens, and this may occur among critically ill patients who have qualifying conditions. Now, there are a variety of consequences associated with marijuana use. These slides are in here only for your reference. Health consequences can be acute. They can occur after one stops, or they can be chronic. The acute effects is generally what people are seeking when they're using marijuana for its so-called recreational benefit. But they can create a state of relaxation or panic in some. It can create tension and anger or confusion in others. It acts primarily, again, on the central nervous system, in memory. There is psychological vulnerability, but no real psychological syndromes that we've shown that come from the use of marijuana. It opens up and unmasks psychological vulnerability. Its most profound effect is on recent memory. Long-term memories are not affected. It's an Alzheimer's-like syndrome in individuals who are using it chronically. But what happens in that your inability to have short-term memories is that you are incapable of functioning on the basis of knowledge regarding your personal life. You can't learn from what's happening to you if you cannot transfer from short-term memory to long-term memory your experiences. Human memory, the site of human memory is the hippocampus. There are a lot of these receptors for anandamide there. Hippocampal damage is associated with failure to make new memories. If you stimulate the receptors in the hippocampus, hippocampal activity decreases. With repeated use, tolerance to the loss of memory develops, but with repeated use, since activity decreases, the person increases their use, and they're constantly driving their ability to form memories down. Human aggressive responding has been studied. They've taken subjects in the lab and provoked them coming off the drug and gave them an opportunity to retaliate against that being provoked, and measured the amount of retaliation. In acute marijuana withdrawal, subjects that had antisocial personality disorder showed more aggressive responding. This is not a drug that chills everybody out, in fact. It has some effects to the contrary. Persistent and chronic effects can occur in the physical domains, the social domains, and psychologically. You name an organ, we can find an impact of chronic marijuana exposure on that organ. Socially, it's associated with poor performance in school, higher dropout rates, and increased delinquency. It's also associated with increased absence, tardiness, accidents, workers' compensation claims, and job turnover. And I'm going to leave for Bob DuPont and Peter to talk about motor vehicular crashes in this impaired state. A number of psychiatric illnesses or syndromes have been described. While it may precipitate an illness, it doesn't actually cause, other than abuse and dependence on marijuana, a psychiatric illness. There are visual distortions, decreased detection, recognition, and analysis of the peripheral visual field, impairments in learning, listening and repetition learning is compromised, and that's a lot of what happens in lower grades and middle school. And heavy use is associated with deficits in math skill and verbal expression. There are also economic consequences to marijuana use. Looking at the issues of quality and variability, the products of vaporization or burning are dependent upon the quality and composition of whatever material you put in that joint or the vaporizer. Rapid delivery of dose is not essential with chronic conditions. Titration of dose is more important. So you'll hear a lot of complaints about Marinol not being a good medicine because it has a slow onset of action. If you're using it in response to vomiting that has been set up, it's not a great drug because it is a sticky molecule dissolved in sesame seed oil, so it has to pass from the stomach through the small intestine to the base of the liver where it has biliary absorption because of an action of the gallbladder. So its absorption can be extremely erratic. Patients will tell you from time to time they can't predict what kind of effect they're going to get from it, and it's not meant to be used acutely in response to something where you need an immediate effect. They are working on different formulations of it now, however. But in dealing with somebody who has a chronic disease, you're looking for a steady state delivery of the molecule, not a rapid delivery of the molecule, such as that which you get from smoked marijuana. And think about it. When you have chronic pain, you may be given a short-term opioid immediately, but the doctor over time tries to add up how much you've taken in a day, and they try to get you on a longer-acting form because the best medication management of a chronic disease is having a steady state of that molecule in your blood, not a rapid onset and offset, you know, sort of this hatchet-like effect of the drug. Modern medicines are passing the early test of efficacy. Medicines that are being either extracted from the plant or single molecules. Preclinical and clinical research has increased exponentially in the last 20 years, and most scientific reviews are structured for a disease state rather than a specific cannabis. So in your handout, I list for you, and there's a lot of detail in the ASAM paper about a variety of controlled clinical trials that are going on for medicines that are in this space and interact with the endocannabinoid system. There's the THC single molecule, dronabinol. They're plant-derived Sativex and Canador, and there's a synthetic analog of Sesamet. And again, I talked about new delivery systems for the existing medications are under review. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but I have for you in the handout what we know about the different formulations that interact with the endocannabinoid system. And it's much more expansive now than just Marinol. We have CBD, THC formulations that are from the plant, Sesamet, and Sativex. Does cannabis require rescheduling? Always hear about that. Schedule 2 drugs are subject to the same restrictions and requirements as Schedule 1 relative to manufacturing and procurement quotas, security measures, record keeping, and import-export permits along the whole range of ways in which we regulate them. And while Schedule 1 drugs are not available as a prescription, even if we reschedule to 2, marijuana would not be available as a prescription because the FDA does not approve bulk substances. Doesn't approve bulk opium, doesn't approve bulk cocaine. You need standardization, formulation, testing, and administering an appropriate delivery system in order to be able to be prescribed no matter what schedule you sit in. So even if we moved it from 1 to 2, doctors couldn't write prescriptions. Doctors could only certify that you have a disease that allows you to get and carry marijuana in certain states. The FDA approval of a specific botanical drug product would allow Schedule 2, however, that would not necessarily allow bulk cannabis into Schedule 2. And the FDA does allow differential scheduling. So dronabinol is Schedule 3, it's pure THC, while cannabis is Schedule 1. So everything as it is approved gets reviewed and scheduled based upon all of the data from the studies and then an experience with it. Because dronabinol was down-scheduled to 3 after people had experience with it on the market. All other THC, even though that THC is in Schedule 3, is in Schedule 1. And Xyrem, which is GHB in a pill form, is Schedule 3, but GHB is Schedule 1. The street drug is Schedule 1. So you can have differential scheduling. So you can leave bulk cannabis in 1, and if you produce a formulation that can be approved, it can be in whatever Schedule 1 determines it needs to be in once you have met the standards of quality, efficacy, and safety. Schedule 2 would not allow pharmacists to compound. Rescheduling wouldn't lift criminal penalties. And rescheduling wouldn't change the U.S. obligation under the single convention. So even if you reschedule, University of Mississippi would be the only provider of research-grade cannabis in this country. It wouldn't allow Boston or any other city to begin to produce its own marijuana for research. Now, there is one thing that might make research by a physician investigator a little bit easier, and that's if you have a Schedule 2 license, you're able to work on a Schedule 2 drug. But currently, if you are working on cannabis as a research investigator, you have to get every protocol on that product approved, and you have to renew annually. So what are the conclusions? The world's most qualified medical organization reviewed the issues of marijuana as a medicine and determined that physicians should not recommend use until we have quality, efficacy, and safety data to support that advice. The risk-benefit analysis of smoked cannabis does not support its use of marijuana as medicine. But we are on the verge of a new era of medication development using the knowledge gained from the study of the endocannabinoid system. And what physicians want first to do is to do no harm. And what we rely on you to do is to express your voice so that Illinois does not go down the same path that other states have gone down, exposing the citizens of Illinois to non-safe, non-efficacious, non-standardized, raw botanical material well in advance of information that I as a physician, that Bob as a physician would need to know in order to handle it safely. So we are relying on you to be inoculated against the messages that have been constructed to support the making marijuana more available to individuals, families, and communities across Illinois. We need your help in doing that. I've given you a number of resources. You can find out more about the paper on the ASAM website. Obviously, NIDA has a lot of information. The FDA has information about the drug approval process. And there's information from me through my Two Dreams website. You can reach me through my Twitter. And I've been blogging on back rehab. So if you know of people who have pain and need to demystify rehabilitation for that, it's available as a public service. It has a lot of information on that. And then I also have the Save Our Societies from Drug website, which has information on how these ballot initiatives are going across the state.